In today's episode, a murderous brown bear in Japan goes on a killing spree, attacking everyone it saw hiking around Mount Daisingen. After dozens of attacks, it finishes its killing spree by attacking a group of firemen. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying quadruple brown bear attack on Mount Daisingen. Welcome to Final Affliction. Japan hadn't seen a brown bear attack in more than a decade, but 2023 brought a sudden surge in attacks and even deaths. In the Oshima Peninsula of Hokkaido, an area littered with rich, nature-infused hiking trails and home to the magnificent Mount Daisingen, brown bears usually keep to themselves, preferring to avoid humans, and the ever-polite Japanese are more than happy to leave the reclusive animals to their own devices. The first attack was most likely just a terribly unfortunate event where someone ended up at the wrong place at the wrong time. A hobby angler was found beheaded next to Lake Shumarina. That same day, a bear with some fishing boots still in its mouth was spotted not far away from the scene. After examining the scene, authorities came to the conclusion that the fisherman happened to cross the bear in the thickly forested terrain. The chance encounter led to the bear reacting defensively. Unfortunately, the middle-aged man, who just happened to startle the animal, didn't stand a chance against the massive Usuri brown bear. But this first taste of blood just set the young male off. Every encounter with humans after that point was painted with blood, death, and a ferociousness that Japan hadn't seen in 10 years. The next victim was an 84-year-old woman out enjoying a walk in the sunshine. When she didn't return home, her family and friends went out looking for her. It would be her own neighbors who found her, completely battered and barely clinging to life. Just before she died, the woman managed to tell paramedics that it was a bear that attacked her. She soon after succumbed to her injuries, dying in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The third victim was also an unsuspecting hiker, but this woman's remains were found hours after the attack. Judging by her injuries, authorities came to the conclusion that they had a huge problem on their hands. This one single bear had gotten the taste for human blood when it attacked the fishermen back in April. They immediately started scouring the entire island for any signs of aggressive bears. But almost every forested area in the whole of Japan now had reports of attacks coming in. Experts agreed that the constant encroachment of human settlements on their breeding and feeding grounds was the cause. The usually shy animals were forced out in the open in search of food, which inevitably led to interactions with people. In total, 109 people were injured by various brown bears in 2023, but the Oshima Peninsula took the brunt of the attacks. That single bear on the island was out to kill anything and everything in its path. After 8 months of searching and the entire community being on high alert, the terrible year would finally come to an end in terrible back-to-back attacks that involved 4 people. 3 men were walking one of the popular trails around the base of Mount Daisingen when the 850-pound male bear stormed out at them from the thick forest. But this time the attack wasn't upon a lone hiker. These were 3 young and strong men. They were firefighters by trade, and the colleagues were enjoying a friendly hike up the mountain that day in October. When the animal took an angry swipe at the first man, breaking his jaw in 2 places, the other 2 bravely stormed at the beast to protect their friend. But he jumped up from where he fell and stormed at the beast alongside his companions, despite his injuries. One young man had a utility knife strapped to his belt. Somehow, in the chaos of deadly, strong paws and in between the well-aimed punches of his companions, the man managed to stab the bear in the throat. Rearing back from the pain, the animal only exaggerated his injury by tearing the knife through his flesh, leaving a wide and profusely bleeding wound in his neck. It turned around and ran, finally realizing that it was outnumbered and that these humans had much more dangerous weapons than the fishing rods and walking sticks of its previous victims. It crashed through the forest, maddened by pain and anger. The men administered first aid to their friend with the broken jaw and bound another's broken fingers. The one who wielded the knife had scratches on his shoulder that would require stitches. By the time help arrived, the men had patched themselves up so well that the paramedics only needed to focus on the man's broken jaw. Authorities stormed into the woods. They finally had a recent event from the bear that they had been looking for since April. If they were ever going to find the ominous serial killer, now was their chance. In the 30 minutes since the attack, the crazed animal had stumbled out onto a path just 50 meters away, directly in front of 22-year-old Kanato Yanaiki, a fourth-year university student out for a stroll on a rare weekend away from tests and studying. His mind was full of the pretty girl's eye he'd been trying to catch all semester, and he was focused on getting one foot securely in front of the other. Kanato was just starting to make his way up the mountain. The uphill climb was much more taxing, and it required his full attention. He didn't even hear the distant crashing as the animal made its way through the trees and bushes. When it finally breached the trees only a few feet away from the young man, Kanato barely had time to scream before the crazed beast lunged itself at him. Roaring with anger and pain, it instantly pounced at the human. Kanato backtracked when the bear leapt at him, but going downhill, his feet knotted under him, and he went crashing down onto the stones and dirt. Lying on his back, he only saw a brown blur bolt at him before its crushing weight landed on him. The weight of the bear instantly snapped his sternum in two and shattered several of Kanato's ribs. There was no time to scream out. The bear's enormous jaws closed down on the man's neck and head, tearing away the flesh as the beast violently shook him. Pinned to the ground, blood gushing from his torn neck, Kanato was powerless to fight the thing off. But then the weight suddenly lifted off his chest, and the savage stumbled down the path. The bear was still bleeding from a severed artery in its neck, thanks to the well-aimed knife wound from the firefighter just minutes before. It fell to the ground with a crash that Kanato was relieved in hearing. The young man was taking painful, gurgled breaths. His lungs were punctured by dozens of shards of bones from his broken ribs, and even as he was drowning in his own fluid, the rest of his blood was spewing out of his neck. He could only weakly try to stem the flow from his neck, but his vision was darkening, and Kanato's fingers jerked uncontrollably. As he slipped out of consciousness, the animal lying a few feet from him also sank into the void of blood loss. They both lay there, dying, as the authorities made their way through the brush, following the path of destruction that the bear left in its wake. They came upon the two bodies, both still warm to the touch, but very obviously dead. The firefighters had the upper hand because they happened to be in a group, and they were incredibly fit and strong. No single man could win a fight bare-handed against an animal this large. Kanato was doomed the moment the bear stumbled onto his path, no matter how extensive its injuries were. Even though this was no crime scene, it was pretty obvious what had transpired. The dutiful officers still emptied the contents of the bear's stomach and sent it away to confirm that it contained the remains of Kanato. But the main reason it was done was so that every scrap of Kanato could be buried in his coffin. But despite another victim of the bear, the city could now rest easy once again. The citizens knew the bear was dead, unable to take any more innocent hikers to their terrifying final affliction.